Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to view this presentation on cultural and linguistic competencies. We believe that the adoption of these core competencies into practice will improve the outcomes for children with behavioral health needs and their families. These foundational modules are developed to be viewed by family members, higher education students, paraprofessionals, and professionals. A list of resources and references have also been provided. This module will be presented by Amy Paris-Grogan from the Children's Behavioral Health Collaborative at the Office of Minority Health and Refugee Affairs. The New Hampshire Children's Behavioral Health Workforce Development Network is to build a sustainable infrastructure for the professional development of the children's behavioral health workforce based upon the core competencies and infused with the system of care core values and guiding principles. The need is for New Hampshire to have an adequate workforce and an infrastructure to support those who work with children, youth, and families. The New Hampshire Children's Behavioral Health Core Competencies were developed in 2011 by a representation of diverse stakeholder groups, including child-serving community mental health providers, family organizations, state policymakers, and university staff. The goal was that the competencies would be the first step in developing systematic and comprehensive human services development infrastructure. The competencies were developed using the system of care core values and principles as the foundation. There are 7 domains: family-driven and youth-guided practice, cultural and linguistic competence, childhood development and disorders, screening, assessment and referral, treatment planning, interventions and service delivery, systems knowledge and collaboration, and quality improvement. The competencies are organized for professional staff by levels of knowledge and skills in each domain. There are 3 levels: foundational, intermediary, and advanced. The levels are designed to identify the skill level of practitioners. They are fluid and not specifically tied to certain formal education and training or position titles. A copy of the report can be accessed, and a link is provided at the end of this presentation. This is one of a series of modules designed to support the development of core competencies in the children's behavioral health workforce. This module addresses cultural and linguistic competence at the foundational level. Throughout this module, you will learn about engagement and communication, limited English proficiency and low literacy skills, social justice, and best practices.
My name is Amy Paris-Grogan, and I'm the Behavioral Health, Cultural, and Linguistic Competence Coordinator for New Hampshire. I work for the Families and Systems Together, also known as FAST, Forward for Children and Youth project, and the Children's Behavioral Health Collaborative. My job is to help all the various partners and stakeholders to infuse cultural and linguistic competence, or CLC, throughout the entire system of care. My contact information will be provided at the end. Throughout this module, many pictures and references are hyperlinked, including the 2 pages of resources at the end. So feel free to pause the video, click on a link, and explore that topic further. Let's start by briefly considering the many dimensions of culture. This graphic represents just a few, such as gender, spirituality or religion, and sexual orientation. Culture helps to shape the way we experience the world, make decisions, and relate to one another. Because of the importance culture plays in an individual's identity, the behavioral health world must be appropriately prepared to be able to provide high-quality services and therapeutic interventions, which means being culturally and linguistically competent, both as individuals and as institutions or organizations. Thus, cultural and linguistic competence is a core competency of New Hampshire's Children's Behavioral Health Collaborative and a core value of the system of care. Let's consider the many elements of culture for New Hampshire. What do we know about geography, socioeconomic status, and spirituality or religion for the state overall? New Hampshire can look quite different when looked at by different factors. With regards to geography, the northern part of the state is rural, while the southern part is more populated. In fact, the difference here is multifold. While Coos County's population density is 18 people per square mile, Hillsborough County's population density is 457 people per square mile. That's 25 times as many people. Overall in New Hampshire, 8% of our residents live below the poverty level. That percent rises to 11 in Cheshire County and drops to 5 in Rockingham County. For spirituality or religious identity, 29% of New Hampshire identifies as Catholic and 23% identifies as mainline Protestant. A little over a quarter of New Hampshire's population is unaffiliated with a religious tradition. Another, often more visible element of culture is race and ethnicity. Let's consider together the racial and ethnic demographic makeup of New Hampshire. The demographics in New Hampshire have been changing. The Carsey Institute summarizes the racial ethnic demographic trends as follows. Racial ethnic diversity is increasing. That diversity is spatially concentrated, and diversity is increasing from youngest to oldest. In fact, for the state overall, racial and ethnic minorities produced 50% of our state's population gain from 2000 to 2010. And racial and ethnic minorities made up 8% of the state's population in 2012, up from 4.9% in 2000. Manchester and Nashua are our more diverse urban centers, with Manchester at 18% minority and Nashua at 21% in the year 2010. The geographic concentration is very evident in these maps, which reveal varying levels of diversity, with the highest concentration in our urban centers. In 2010, Manchester was 18% minority and Nashua was 21% minority. What may be surprising is that there are currently census tracts in our state that are over 40% minority. This is even more pronounced among our under 18 population, reflected in the figure on the right, where we see even more areas of higher diversity. This slide also summarizes New Hampshire's higher diversity in our youth. Remember that the state as a whole was about 8% minority. You'll notice that the youth minority population is just about double that of the adults. Finally, it's important to understand that not only is the state becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, the minority population is both young and growing. These population charts demonstrate the older white non-Hispanic population on the left compared to the minority population on the right, who are young and of childbearing age. This has implications for our educational and behavioral health systems. In fact, during the 2012-2013 school year, the New Hampshire Department of Education reported that the percent of enrolled minorities was almost 12%, with Manchester's and Nashua's minority population at 33%. So this module is titled Cultural and Linguistic Competence. It's about understanding your journey towards becoming more culturally competent as an individual and about steps you can take for your organization to become more culturally effective and capable of providing culturally and linguistically competent care to clients. Let's start with a definition of cultural and linguistic competence. Cultural competence is the integration of knowledge, information, and data about individuals and groups of people into clinical standards, skills, service approaches and supports, policies, measures, and benchmarks that align with the individual's or group's culture and increases the quality, appropriateness, and acceptability of healthcare and outcomes. Linguistic competence is the capacity of an organization and its personnel to communicate effectively and convey information in a manner that is easily understood by diverse audiences, including persons of limited English proficiency, those who have low literacy skills or are not literate, and individuals with disabilities. I find it helpful to think of cultural and linguistic competence as a provider's ability to engage and respond effectively to the needs of each child, youth, and family. The authenticity of the clinical interaction can only occur when paying attention to the client's unique culture. It is committing to appropriately and effectively interacting with people of different races, ethnicities, and languages. You cannot have a real interaction without attending to culture. To be successful, we must demonstrate respectful and sensitive responses to youth and families given their unique culture. We need to validate and engage youth and families based upon their unique life experiences. It is our job to develop and provide resources that value cultural and linguistic diversity. Brochures and flyers posted in multiple languages, bilingual staff, and interpretation services will help to open and retain lines of communication. Demonstrating appreciation for a client's cultural and linguistic diversity in all aspects of practice truly helps to engage them in the therapeutic process. Finally, it's fun, educational, and beneficial to the therapeutic relationship to participate in various cultural traditions with the populations you serve. We refer to people learning English as English language learners, ELL, or persons with limited English proficiency, LAP. It is important to keep in mind that oftentimes English is not a person's second language. It may actually be the fourth or fifth language that he or she is trying to master. The term ELL is commonly used when referring to youth, whereas the term LEP is a more universal term. When we are working with LEP clients, it is our responsibility to recognize the need for an interpreter. The goal is to communicate effectively and understand each other. I also want to take a moment to distinguish between interpreters that provide verbal communication access, whether it be in person or over the phone, and translators who provide written communication access by translating a document from English to the client's preferred language. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 8% of New Hampshire's population speak a language other than English at home. As the service provider, it is your responsibility to recognize the need for interpretation services and arrange to have interpretation for all encounters, whether in person or over the phone. Also, be sure to be aware of all the points of contact that you have with youth and families when you think about interpreter and translator services. This means consider the multiple points of contact you or other staff in your organization have with clients and the importance of cultural and linguistic competence at each point. I'm sure you and your organization can add to this map. Persons with low literacy skills have a below average capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information. 35% of our population is categorized as having inadequate or marginal functional literacy. We need to recognize our clients' level of literacy and meet them where they're at. We should aim to produce all written material at a 6th grade reading level, and we should utilize auditory ways of communicating as well. The Disparities National Coordinating Center has a health literacy learning toolbox that has a great list of resources to address issues of health equity. This toolbox focuses on health literacy as an important determinant of health outcomes. It includes a quick primer on health literacy and provides links to a set of freely available articles, tools, and resources. Social justice is based on notions of equality and equal opportunity. We must work to understand and acknowledge the historical disadvantages and marginalization that minority populations have encountered, barriers that youth and families perceive they face, and how those barriers relate to their views of behavioral health. People have explored the rationale for CLC, and now we know there are many reasons to provide culturally and linguistically appropriate services. For some, it may be to respond to current and projected demographic changes in the U.S., to eliminate long-standing disparities in the health status of people of diverse racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds, or to improve the quality of services and health outcomes. While for others, it may be to meet legislative, regulatory, or accreditation mandates, to gain a competitive edge in the marketplace, or to decrease the likelihood of liability malpractice claims. The bottom line is, cultural and linguistic competence improves the quality of services. We briefly learned about item number 1. Now we're going to discuss items 4, 3, and 2. A number of states have proposed or passed legislation pertaining to cultural competency training for one or more segments of their state's health professionals. At least 6 states have moved to mandate some form of cultural and linguistic competency for either all or a component of its healthcare workforce. Accreditation organizations like the National Quality Forum and the Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities are developing equity measures and culturally competent care standards and requirements to assure the delivery of culturally and linguistically appropriate healthcare services. These standards apply to behavioral health services as well. Professional associations are issuing guidelines of their own for these topics. the National Association of Social Workers has indicators for achievement of their standards for cultural competence in social work practice, and the American Psychological Association has guidelines for providers of psychological services to ethnic, linguistic, and culturally diverse populations. Cultural and linguistic competence is included in the American Counseling Association's competencies, the Psychiatric Mental Health Nurse Practitioner competencies, and it's included in the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy core competencies. So what's your association saying? In our list on the rationale for cultural and linguistic competence, another reason is to improve the quality of services and health outcomes. The acquisition of multicultural competence and the adaptation of psychotherapy, whether in content, language, or approach, can improve client engagement and retention in treatment and can enhance development of the therapeutic alliance. Failure to understand the cultural background of adolescents and their families can lead to misdiagnosis, lack of cooperation, poor use of health services, and general alienation of the adolescent from the system of care. Cultural competence is critical in achieving good health and well-being. Finally, addressing long-standing disparities is an additional compelling reason for becoming culturally and linguistically competent. A disparity is a difference between two populations of people in prevalence, access, diagnosis, quality of care, and treatment of an illness, not justified by differences in health or preference. Mental health disparities exist and need to be addressed in order to improve the quality of care and services provided to minority populations. Populations can be defined by factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, education or income, disability, geographic location, as in rural or urban, or sexual orientation. Disparities in mental health are just as dangerous and debilitating as in any other chronic disease. This graph depicts the unmet need for mental health treatments. Among children with unmet need, significant disparities in initiation of an episode of mental health care were found, with whites approximately twice as likely as blacks and Latinos to initiate care. Research indicates that disparities exist in access and use of mental health services. In addition to differences in access, use, and outcomes of healthcare services, we can see disparities in people's perceptions of their community and neighborhood environments with a potential impact on their education and emotional well-being. When New Hampshire youth were asked if they felt like they mattered to people in their community, only 1/3 of Latinos agreed, compared with almost half of the white non-Hispanic population. 4 times as many minority youth, as compared to white non-Hispanic, did not attend school because they felt they would be unsafe. Here are youth responses to the same question in a different year. You can see that the minority response is broken out further by race and ethnicity. We need to listen and respond to what New Hampshire children are telling us. The community and environmental impact on various cultures can be revealed by stratifying the data by race and ethnicity. Now let's consider the importance of data. In order to be able to identify disparities, we need to be able to stratify the data we have, to be able to review outcomes for different populations. This means you need to ask people to identify their race and ethnicity so it's part of your client's demographic profile. You need to ask what is their preferred language for their clinical encounter so that you can be prepared to provide language access or an interpreter at the time of the visit. You can then use your real data, that's race, ethnicity, and language data, to analyze your outcomes to identify disparities and then influence decision-making for quality improvements. Collecting real data is new to us in New Hampshire. The Health Research and Educational Trust Disparities Toolkit team produced a disparities toolkit. The toolkit is a web-based tool that provides information and resources for systematically collecting race, ethnicity, and primary language data from clients. Here you can see they provide scripts to help guide you through the process of collecting this data. There are best practices or standards for how to collect data on race and ethnicity. Section 4302A of the Affordable Care Act describes the latest data collection standards for ethnicity, race, sex, primary language, and disability. Ethnicity should always be asked first, and then race. One or more response category may be selected. And here is the standard for collecting data on language. Remember, having a clinical encounter is a more complex interaction than checking out at the grocery store or conducting a bank transaction. While some limited English proficient people may be fairly conversant in regular social situations, a therapy session introduces constructs and terminology that may be new for the client. The client may be more anxious and have a difficult time understanding these new concepts to be able to fully benefit therapeutically from the encounter. Thus, it is important to identify the client's preferred language for the services you will be providing. Once you have learned that, you should make a note or create a flag in your database if an interpreter is needed for encounters with that client. It's important to use best practices in our work. Some are listed here. Best practices for cultural and linguistic competency start with you assessing, evaluating, and understanding your own personal biases. We need to be aware of the personal beliefs we bring into the room when meeting with youth and develop a personal action plan to stop and remember, this is my way of looking at the world in this particular situation, and this may not prove useful for this youth. This list is in regard to an individual's interaction with a client. Addressing organizational policies is also part of best practice. Cultural and linguistic competence is not a piece of the puzzle, even if you view it as the piece that holds everything else together. CLC is the puzzle glue. It's a layer to every individual and every department that is intended to strengthen the organization as a whole and better serve our changing community. There are various elements that are listed here that contribute to an organization being able to serve clients effectively with regards to cultural and linguistic competence. Culturally and linguistically effective organizations have a defined set of values, principles, guidelines, and policies. These organizations have a diverse workforce that is reflective of their community, and they demonstrate behaviors and attitudes that value diversity. All staff work on improving their cultural competency. Trainings are offered on a regular basis to help individuals recognize their personal biases. Organizational assessments are also conducted on a regular basis and are used to evaluate where your agency is at and develop your next steps in your action plan. Culturally effective organizations engage the community in decisions and evaluations. They provide language access and collect data on race, ethnicity, and language so that they can identify and address disparities and improve quality. These are the elements that we strive to incorporate into organizational policies. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration states that culturally effective organizations conduct a regular assessment of members' range of values, beliefs, knowledge, and experiences within the organization that would facilitate working with diverse communities. These organizations have policies, procedures, and resources that facilitate the ongoing development of cultural competence and inclusion. The organization is willing to commit the resources necessary to build or strengthen relationships with groups and communities. Members are representative of the community population. They collaborate with other community organizations, and organization members are involved in supportive relationships with other community groups. The organization is seen as a partner by other community organizations and members. Community members and organizations have had an opportunity to create and/or review audio-visual materials, public service announcements, training guides, printed resources, and other materials to ensure they are acceptable to and attuned to their community population. Lastly, culturally competent organizations have a regular forum for a wide variety of community members to provide both formal and informal feedback on the impact of interventions in the community. There are many benefits to providing culturally and linguistically effective care. Access, engagement, and retention is improved. When youth feel they are welcome and appreciated, they are more likely to engage in services and stay connected. Improvement is seen in the quality of care as well as the outcomes that result from the improved care. Overall costs of services are reduced because clients are assessed, diagnosed, and treated appropriately upon their first encounter with providers. So where do we start? An assessment is a great place to start, both on the individual level and the organizational level. If you visit the National Center for Cultural Competence website, you will find all different types of assessments. Work with your organization to implement the National Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services Standards, also known as CLAS standards. These standards outline steps to help you improve the quality of care you provide on an individual level as well as an organizational level. 4 of the 15 standards assist you with compliance to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. All human and social services are included in the CLAS standards description of health and healthcare. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health provides a blueprint for advancing and sustaining CLAS policy and practice. A link to this blueprint is provided here. The CLAS standards were designed for all health-serving entities. The Office of Minority Health uses a very broad definition. All human and social services are included in the CLAS standards description of health and healthcare. Here is the complete list of all 15 standards, and here is a section from page 10 of the blueprint describing the intended audience. Here's an example of culture showing itself. I'm using my own assumptions of someone inviting guests over their house. Let's use a house as a visual graphic to help us understand CLAS standards. The principal standard is the roof and frame. It supports all the other standards. The principal standard states, provide effective, equitable, understandable, and respectful quality care and services that are responsive to diverse cultural health beliefs and practices, preferred languages, health literacy, and other communication needs. The foundation is where we advance, recruit, and educate leadership and workforce through policy, practices, and allocated resources. Next, we have to look outside our house. Think about how you welcome someone to your house. You inform them of your street number and provide them with understandable directions to your house. CLAS states to inform all individuals of the availability of language assistance and provide easy-to-understand materials in languages commonly used by the populations you serve. When you have a guest visit your house, you offer refreshments and ensure that you have a stocked refrigerator. CLAS asks that you offer language assistance and ensure the competence of your workforce. Just like in your home, you have house rules and goals. CLAS states that you should have policies and goals. And just like you enjoy renovating and updating your house, CLAS asks that you conduct regular, ongoing assessments and collect current demographic data. Your conflict resolution process and your progress in implementing and sustaining CLAS standards are represented by the windows on the house because you want these standards to be transparent. Lastly, your deck represents where you partner with the community to design, implement, and evaluate policies, practices, and services. Think of CLAS standards as the hospitality and class that you provide when a guest visits you in your home. So when are we culturally and linguistically competent? It's a lifelong process. Cultural and linguistic competence is a continuous process of self and organizational assessments in comparison with our changing demographics. It is work that as professionals in the behavioral health field, we need to continually be engaged in. We like to think of cultural competency on a continuum in which everyone has room for growth and learning. Here are a few resources to help guide your organization in creating and/or updating culturally and linguistically appropriate services. Remember that an assessment is a great place for you and your agency to begin this work. And here are some more resources listed for your convenience. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to learn about what it means to be culturally and linguistically competent. Please feel free to contact me with any questions you may have.